The wooden floors of the Grand City Concert Hall gleamed under the dim evening lights as Mike Torres ran his mop across the stage for the third time that night. At 42, with tired eyes and calloused hands, he took pride in his work even when no one was watching. The concert hall had emptied hours ago. The last of the maintenance staff had clocked out, and Mike was alone with his thoughts and the faint smell of lemon-scented cleaner. 6 nights a week after his day job at the hardware store, Mike arrived at the concert hall, changed into his gray uniform, and disappeared into the rhythm of his cleaning routine. Sweep, mop, polish, dust, each task carried out with quiet precision. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover the bills that his day job couldn't. And more importantly, it came with health insurance for his daughter, Lily. At home, his 10-year-old daughter was probably already asleep, watched over by Mrs. Patterson from next door, a kind elderly woman who'd stepped in to help after Mike's wife had passed away 3 years ago. The thought of Lily made his chest tighten with a familiar mixture of love and worry. She was growing up too fast, asking questions he wasn't always ready to answer, like why they couldn't afford dance lessons like her friends, or why Daddy always looked so tired. Mike paused his mopping and glanced at his watch. 11:37 p.m. He was ahead of schedule tonight. Setting the mop against a nearby wall, he walked slowly across the polished stage toward the magnificent grand piano that stood center stage, its black surface reflecting the soft glow of the safety lights. The piano belonged to the concert hall, a Steinway worth more money than Mike would see in 5 years of work. Tomorrow night, some famous pianist from Europe would play it for a sold-out crowd. Tickets started at prices Mike couldn't dream of affording. Looking over his shoulder, confirming he was truly alone, Mike carefully lifted the cover from the keys. His fingers hovered over the ivory, not quite touching. He hadn't played in front of anyone except Lily in years, but alone in this empty hall, he sometimes allowed himself this small moment of joy. Mike sat down on the bench, his work uniform crinkling as he adjusted his posture. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let his fingers find their places. The first notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the empty concert hall, tentative at first, then growing in confidence as muscle memory took over. Music had once been more than a midnight secret for Mike. Before life had taken its unexpected turns, before bills and responsibilities had piled up, he'd been a scholarship student at the State University's music program. His professors had used words like promising and gifted, but when his parents' health had declined, he'd dropped out to help support them, putting his dreams of becoming a concert pianist on an indefinite hold. Then he'd met Sophia, fallen in love, had Lily, and found happiness in a different kind of life. When Sophia died unexpectedly from an aneurysm, music became both his comfort and his heartache, a reminder of what might have been and what he'd lost. As his fingers danced across the keys, Mike's shoulders relaxed. The weight he carried, single fatherhood, 2 jobs, constant financial worry seemed to lift with each note. His playing wasn't perfect. Years of manual labor had stiffened his once nimble hands, and lack of practice had dulled his technical skill, but the emotion in his playing remained untouched by time, perhaps even deepened by the struggles he'd faced. Lost in the music, Mike didn't notice the door at the back of the concert hall opening slightly. He didn't see the slender figure of a woman pausing in the doorway, her hand frozen on the handle as the unexpected sound of piano music reached her ears. Diane Chen, the concert hall's artistic director, had returned to retrieve a forgotten folder. She stood motionless, listening to the night janitor playing with a sensitivity that professional musicians worked years to develop. The piece transitioned from Debussy to something she didn't recognize, something raw and improvised, full of longing and hope intertwined. Mike's eyes remained closed as his fingers found their way through a melody he'd composed in the small hours of morning while Lily slept. He'd never written it down, never named it, but in his mind, it was Sophia's song, a conversation with his late wife that needed no words. The emotion building in his chest spilled into the music, growing more intense until tears slid down his cheeks. In this moment, alone on stage, Mike allowed himself to feel everything he kept carefully contained during daylight hours: grief, love, exhaustion, and a buried dream that refused to die completely. As the final notes faded into silence, Mike opened his eyes and quickly wiped his face with his sleeve. His momentary escape was over. Reality awaited. Tomorrow would bring another day of stocking shelves, helping customers find the right screws or paint colors, then rushing to his second job, all while worrying if Lily had enough attention, enough stability, enough of everything a growing child needs. He stood to close the piano cover when a small sound from the back of the hall made him freeze. A soft footstep, then another. Someone had heard him. Heat rushed to Mike's face as embarrassment and fear collided. Would he lose his job for touching the expensive piano? He couldn't afford that. "Lily couldn't afford that. Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have." Diane stepped into the dim light of the aisle. "That was beautiful," she said simply, walking toward the stage with measured steps. In her early 50s, with silver streaks in her dark hair, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the arts. Mike quickly closed the piano cover. "I'm really sorry, Miss Chen, I was just taking a break. I've already finished most of my cleaning and I made sure my hands were clean before I touched it. It won't happen again." Diane climbed the steps to the stage, studying Mike with curious eyes. "How long have you been playing?" Mike shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his name tag that read Mike T. "I used to play a lot. Not so much anymore, just sometimes at home on an old keyboard." He glanced at his cleaning cart. "I should really finish up." "That last piece," Diane said, ignoring his attempt to end the conversation. "I didn't recognize it. Whose composition was that?" Mike looked down at his worn work shoes. "Just something I made up," he mumbled. "You composed that?" Surprise colored her voice. Mike nodded, wishing he could disappear, talking about music with the artistic director of a prestigious concert hall while wearing a janitor's uniform felt like worlds, colliding in the most uncomfortable way possible. "Studied music for a while. A long time ago," he offered, hoping to end the awkward silence. "Never finished my degree." Diane nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Life gets in the way sometimes." "Yeah," Mike agreed, relaxing slightly. "My daughter's worth it, though." "You have a child?" "A daughter. She's 10. Despite his discomfort, Mike couldn't help the small smile that appeared whenever he talked about Lily. "Smart as a whip. Wants to be a scientist or a ballerina depending on the day." Diane smiled. "Sounds like she has options." She paused, then added, "Would you play something else for me?" Mike blinked in surprise. "Now?" "I really should finish. Just one more piece," Diane insisted gently. "Please. It's been a long time since I've been surprised by anything in this hall." Hesitantly, Mike sat back down at the piano. His heart raced as he opened the cover again, feeling Diane's eyes on him. He was used to being invisible in this job, to people looking through him rather than at him. Having someone, especially someone like Diane Chen, actually want to hear him play felt surreal. His fingers trembled slightly as he began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece he'd practiced countless times in his youth. The familiar notes steadied his nerves, and soon he was lost in the music again, forgetting his audience of one. When he finished, the silence that followed felt charged with possibility. Mike closed the cover and stood up, unsure what to say. Diane was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said finally. "You have a gift, Mike, I hope you know that." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Like I said, it was a long time ago." "Music doesn't forget those who truly love it," she replied. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, "The piano needs tuning before tomorrow's concert. Our regular technician is sick. You wouldn't happen to know how to tune a piano, would you?" Mike stared at her. Yes, actually. I used to do that to make extra money during school." A smile spread across Diane's face. "Perfect. Would you be willing to come in early tomorrow? I'd pay you, of course, our regular rate for piano technicians." Mike's mind raced, calculating childcare, his shift at the hardware store, the extra money that would help with Lily's upcoming school field trip. "I could do that," he said finally. "Excellent." Diane reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "Call this number in the morning to confirm." "And Mike?" She paused, looking at him intently. "Thank you for reminding me why we have music in the first place." As Diane's footsteps faded away, Mike stood alone on the stage again, her card clutched in his hand, wondering if the brief conversation had really happened or if he'd imagined it. Either way, he had floors to finish cleaning and a daughter to get home to. But as he returned to his mop, something felt different. A small spark had reignited. Not quite hope, not quite ambition, but something in between. something that had been sleeping for a very long time. For the first time in years, Mike wondered what might happen if he allowed himself to dream again. Just a little. Mike arrived at the concert hall early the next morning, his fingers still tingling from the memory of playing the grand piano. He'd barely slept, replaying his conversation with Diane Chen over and over in his mind. After dropping Lily off at school with a kiss on her forehead and a promise to pick her up on time, he'd called the number on Diane's card, half expecting it to be a wrong number or a dream, but Diane had answered, her voice warm and professional, confirming she wanted him to tune the piano before tonight's performance. The regular rate for piano technicians was 3 times what Mike earned for an entire night of cleaning. Now, standing in the empty concert hall as morning light streamed through the high windows, Mike felt oddly nervous. This was different from sneaking moments at the piano during his night shift. This was stepping back into a world he'd left behind, even if just for a few hours. He set his toolbox down beside the grand piano and ran his hand along its smooth surface. Mike had kept up his piano tuning skills over the years, taking occasional jobs for churches and schools when they came up. The extra money always helped, and the work kept him connected to music in a practical way that didn't hurt as much as playing did. "You came," Diane said, appearing from the wings. She wore a simple black dress and carried a stack of programs for the evening's performance. "Said I would," Mike replied with a small nod, opening his toolbox. He felt strangely self-conscious in his faded jeans and plaid shirt. Clothes for working, not for a place like this. Diane set the programs down and watched as Mike opened the piano, his movements confident and practiced. "How long have you been working here, Mike?" "Almost 2 years now," he answered, focusing on his tools rather than meeting her gaze. "Started right after my wife passed. Needed the extra income and the benefits." "I'm sorry about your wife," Diane said quietly. Mike nodded his thanks, still not looking up. He'd gotten used to those words, learned to accept them without crumbling. "And before that, you mentioned studying music." Mike adjusted his tuning lever. "State University music performance. Piano was my instrument," he paused. "Had to drop out in my 3rd year when my parents got sick. Never made it back. Yet you still play beautifully," Diane observed. Mike shrugged. "Not like I used to." He finally looked up at her. "Should take me about 2 hours to tune this properly. Is there anything specific the performer wants?" Diane seemed to understand his need to change the subject. "Just standard concert tuning. Thomas Klein is very particular but not unusual in his requirements." Mike's hands froze momentarily. "Thomas Klein is playing tonight?" The name belonged to one of the most celebrated pianists in the world, a performer whose recordings Mike had listened to countless times. "Yes," Diane said with a small smile. "You know his work?" "Who doesn't?" Mike replied, trying to sound casual as he returned to his task. Inside, though, he felt a strange mix of excitement and sadness. Once, long ago, he'd dreamed of playing on stages where people like Thomas Klein performed. As Mike worked, Diane excused herself to attend to other matters, leaving him alone with the piano. The familiar process of tuning each string, testing and adjusting until everything was in perfect harmony, calmed his mind. This, at least, was something he knew he could do well. The morning light shifted across the floor as he worked, and Mike lost track of time. He was so absorbed in his task that he didn't notice the man who entered from the back of the hall until a voice with a slight German accent spoke. "You have a good ear." Mike looked up, startled, to see a tall, slender man with silver-streaked hair standing at the edge of the stage. Even without the formal attire he wore in photographs, Thomas Klein was instantly recognizable. "Mr. Klein," Mike said, standing quickly. "I'm almost finished. Just a few more adjustments." Klein waved a hand dismissively. "Take your time. A good tuning cannot be rushed." He climbed the steps to the stage and approached the piano. "You are not our regular technician." "No, sir. I'm filling in." Mike hesitated, then added, "I work here at night. Maintenance staff." Klein's eyebrows rose slightly, but he showed no other reaction to this information. "Play something," he said suddenly. Mike blinked. "Excuse me?" "Play something," Klein repeated. "I always ask the tuner to play. It tells me more about the instrument than words can." Mike's mouth went dry. "I'm not sure that's—" "Please," Klein said, his tone making it clear he wasn't actually asking. With trembling hands, Mike sat at the bench. His mind raced through pieces he knew well enough to play without embarrassing himself in front of a world-class pianist. Finally, he settled on Bach's Prelude in C, major from the well-tempered clavier, something relatively simple that would show off the piano's tone without demanding too much technical skill. As he played the familiar arpeggios, Mike kept his focus entirely on the keys, afraid to see whatever judgment might be forming on Klein's face. The piece was elementary for someone of Klein's caliber, something piano students learned early in their training. When he finished, Mike kept his eyes down. "The lower register might need a slight adjustment," he said professionally, trying to hide his discomfort. Klein was silent for a long moment. "Then play something else." Mike looked up confused. "Sir?" "Something you love," Klein clarified, his intense eyes studying Mike. "Not something you think you should play for me." Mike hesitated, then slowly nodded. Taking a deep breath, he began to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a challenging piece that had once been part of his repertoire, one he'd played over and over during late nights at the university practice rooms. As his fingers moved across the keys, Mike forgot about Klein watching him. He forgot about being a janitor playing for a famous pianist. He simply played, letting the music carry him, through memories of who he'd once been and dreams he'd set aside. His technique wasn't flawless. Years without proper practice had taken their toll, but the emotion in his playing was undeniable. When he reached the thunderous coda, Mike poured everything into it. His grief over losing Sophia, his worry for Lily, his own abandoned hopes. The final chords resonated through the hall, and then silence fell. Mike sat still, suddenly aware again of where he was and who was listening. He slowly lifted his hands from the keys. "You were a pianist," Klein said quietly. "It wasn't a question." Mike nodded. "A long time ago." "Music does not forget us even when we try to forget it," Klein said, echoing Diane's words from the night before. "Who did you study with?" "Professor Harold Wilson at State," Mike answered. "And briefly with Dr. Lee at the summer program in Colorado." Klein nodded, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Good teachers." He paused, then asked, "Why did you stop?" Mike looked down at his hands, working hands now, with calluses in different places than when he'd been a student. "Life happened. Family needed me. Then I had my own family to support." He shrugged. "Can't feed a child with music. Many do," Klein observed. "Many better than me," Mike countered. Klein studied him for a long moment. "Perhaps, perhaps not." He glanced at his watch. "I must prepare for rehearsal. Thank you for your work on the piano. It's excellent." Mike nodded, closing the piano and gathering his tools. "Thank you, sir." As he packed up, Klein spoke again. "Will you be here tonight?" "For the performance?" Mike shook his head. "I'll be working. Cleaning staff." Something flickered across Klein's face. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. "I see." He turned to leave, then paused. "What is your name?" Mike Torres." Klein nodded once, committing the name to memory, then walked off stage without another word. Mike finished packing his tools, his mind spinning. He'd just played for Thomas Klein, something even accomplished pianists would be nervous to do, and the man had listened. Actually listened. As he headed toward the exit, Diane appeared in the lobby. "All finished?" she asked. Mike nodded. "All set for tonight." "Perfect. Let me get your payment." She disappeared into an office and returned with an envelope. "I spoke with Thomas. He said the piano sounds excellent." "Thank you," Mike said, taking the envelope. The money would help with Lily's school expenses and maybe even allow them a small treat. Perhaps ice cream after school today. Diane hesitated, then said, "Thomas mentioned you played for him." Heat rose to Mike's face. He insisted. "I didn't mean to overstep." "Overstep?" Diane smiled. "Mike, Thomas Klein doesn't ask just anyone to play for him. He's known for being extremely selective about who he listens to." Mike didn't know how to respond to that, so he simply nodded and tucked the envelope into his pocket. "I should go. Need to get to my other job." "Of course." Diane reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Before you go, I wanted to give you this." Mike took it cautiously. "What is it?" 2 tickets for tonight's performance. Good seats." Seeing his surprised expression, she added, "We always reserve a few for staff. These haven't been claimed." I can't," Mike stammered. "I'm working tonight. I've already spoken with your supervisor. He's approved a schedule change just for tonight." When Mike still hesitated, Diane added gently, "Bring your daughter. Music like this should be shared. Mike looked down at the tickets in his hand, thinking of Lily's face if he told her they were going to a concert at the fancy hall where he worked. She'd never been to a classical performance before. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't quite name. "This is very kind," Diane smiled. Sometimes kindness is simply recognizing what someone needs before they know they need it. She glanced at her watch. "I have to run." "Enjoy the concert, Mike." As Mike walked to his car, the ticket safely tucked in his wallet beside the envelope of money, he felt something shift inside him, a door opening just a crack, letting in a sliver of light he hadn't seen in years. Tonight, instead of cleaning the stage, he would be sitting in the audience with his daughter, listening to one of the world's greatest pianists play the very instrument he had just tuned. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Mike allowed himself to wonder, what else might be possible? "Dad, are you sure these are for us?" Lily asked, her eyes wide as she stared at the concert hall's grand entrance. She wore her best dress, a blue floral print that was slightly too short at the ankles, and had insisted on wearing the small pearl earrings that had once belonged to her mother. "Positive," Mike replied, smoothing down his only dress shirt. He'd rushed home after his hardware store shift to shower and change, his mind racing with thoughts of the day's strange events. Explaining to Lily that they were going to a real concert instead of watching TV had been met with a mixture of excitement and suspicion. "But you're supposed to be working," she said, holding tightly to his hand as they approached the doors. "I got the night off," Mike explained for the third time. "Someone wanted me to tune the piano and they gave me tickets as a thank you." Lily looked up at him, her expression serious beyond her 10 years. "You're really good at the piano, Dad. Better than my music teacher at school." Mike swallowed hard. "I used to practice a lot back when I was younger. Why don't you play more? You only play at night when you think I'm sleeping." Her innocent question hit like a punch to the gut. Mike hesitated, then knelt down to her level. "Sometimes, Lily Bear, grown-ups have to make choices. And sometimes the things we love have to wait while we take care of other important things." "Like me?" she asked quietly. "You're the most important thing," he said firmly. "And tonight we're going to enjoy some beautiful music together, okay?" She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. "Okay." As they entered the concert hall, Mike felt a strange disorientation. He was used to seeing this place empty, with cleaning supplies in hand. Now it buzzed with well-dressed patrons, the lights bright and welcoming rather than dimmed for his night shift. He felt out of place in his slightly worn dress clothes, but Lily's wonder made any discomfort worthwhile. "It's so fancy," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "Like a castle." Mike smiled, seeing the familiar space through her eyes. "It is pretty amazing, isn't it?" He led her to their seats, which were surprisingly good. Center orchestra about 15 rows back. Perfect for seeing the pianist's hands. As they settled in, Lily peppered him with questions about the piano, the composer, and whether they could get ice cream after the show. Mike answered each one patiently, his heart full at her excitement. "Mike, I'm so glad you could make it." Mike looked up to see Diane approaching their row, elegant in a simple black dress. He stood awkwardly, suddenly conscious of his department store clothes. "Ms. Chen, thank you again for the tickets," he said. "This is my daughter Lily." Diane smiled warmly at Lily. "It's lovely to meet you, Lily. Are you excited for the concert?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Dad says Mr. Klein is one of the best piano players in the whole world." "He certainly is," Diane agreed. "And he was very impressed with your father's piano playing this morning." Lily beamed with pride, looking up at Mike. "See, Dad?" "I told you." Mike felt his face grow warm. Mr. Klein was just being polite. "Thomas Klein is never just polite about music," Diane said with a knowing smile. "He's brutally honest, actually." She glanced toward the back of the hall. "I should get back to work. Enjoy the concert, both of you." As she walked away, Lily tugged on Mike's sleeve. "You played for the famous pianist?" "You didn't tell me that part." "It wasn't a big deal," Mike said, settling back into his seat. "He asked me to test the piano after I tuned it." Lily rolled her eyes in a way that reminded him painfully of Sophia. "Dad, that is a big deal." Before Mike could respond, the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the audience. A moment later, Thomas Klein walked onto the stage, his posture straight and confident. The audience applauded enthusiastically as he bowed. then seated himself at the piano Mike had tuned hours earlier. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the hall, the familiar triplets washing over the audience. Mike watched Lily's face as she listened, her expression serious and focused. He'd played recordings of classical music at home sometimes, but seeing it performed live was different, magical. As Klein moved through his program, from Beethoven to Chopin to Liszt, Mike found himself transported. The music unlocked memories he'd kept carefully packed away, late nights in practice rooms, the satisfaction of mastering a difficult passage, the rush of performing, and the dreams he'd once had of sitting where Klein now sat. During intermission, Lily couldn't stop talking about the performance. His hands move so fast. How does he remember all those notes? "Dad, can you play like that?" "Not quite like that," Mike said with a small laugh. "Mr. Klein has practiced for thousands and thousands of hours. But you could, right? If you practiced more?" Lily's faith in him was both touching and painful. "Maybe once," he admitted, "a long time ago." When the second half began, Klein returned to the stage but didn't immediately sit at the piano. Instead, he stepped forward to address the audience. "For my final piece tonight, I had planned to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in an arrangement for solo piano," he said, his accented voice carrying clearly through the hall. "However, I have decided to make a change to the program." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Klein continued, "This morning I had the pleasure of meeting a gifted pianist who once studied at your state university, but now works here at this very concert hall." Mike froze, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. Surely Klein wasn't talking about... "I would like to invite Mike Torres to join me on stage." Lily gasped beside him, grabbing his arm. "Dad, that's you!" Mike sat in stunned silence as a spotlight swept through the audience, finally landing on him. Faces turned and polite applause began. He shook his head slightly, unable to process what was happening. "Come on up, Mike," Klein encouraged, gesturing toward the stage. "I promise not to bite." The audience chuckled, and the applause grew louder, more insistent. Lily pushed at his arm. "Go, Dad, go." Moving as if in a dream, Mike stood and made his way to the aisle. His legs felt wobbly as he walked toward the stage, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes following him. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. As he climbed the steps to the stage, Klein extended his hand. "Thank you for joining me," he said quietly, then more loudly for the audience. "Mike Torres, everyone." The applause continued as Mike stood awkwardly center stage, unsure what was expected of him. Klein guided him to the piano bench. "What are we playing?" Mike whispered, panic rising in his throat. "I thought we might try a duet." Klein replied calmly, "Schubert's Fantasia in F minor." "Do you know it?" Mike nodded numbly. He knew the piece, had studied it years ago, but to play it now without practice with Thomas Klein in front of a full audience. "Impossible. I'll take the secondo part," Klein said, sliding onto the bench beside him. "You play primo. Just follow the music." He placed the sheet music on the stand, though Mike knew from the look in Klein's eyes that the man expected him to play from memory. Mike's gaze found Lily in the audience, her face shining with excitement and pride. She gave him a thumbs up, and something shifted inside him. For her, he could do this. He had to. Taking a deep breath, Mike placed his hands on the keys. Klein nodded once, and they began. The opening melody flowed from Mike's fingers, tentative at first, then with growing confidence as muscle memory took over. Klein's part joined his, the two voices of the piano intertwining in Schubert's hauntingly beautiful composition. The nervousness that had gripped Mike began to fade, replaced by the simple joy of making music, something he hadn't truly felt in years. As they played, a strange thing happened. The concert hall, the audience, even Klein beside him seemed to fade away. There was only the music speaking directly from his heart. Mike closed his eyes, letting his fingers remember what his mind had tried to forget. That once, this had been his greatest love. The piece moved from delicate melodies to thundering chords and back again, the two pianists in perfect sync despite never having played together before. When they reached the final passages, Mike opened his eyes and caught sight of Lily again. She was leaning forward in her seat, her expression a mixture of awe and happiness that made his throat tighten with emotion. This was what he'd given up, but also what he'd gained. A daughter who looked at him like he was capable of anything. The final chords resonated through the hall, and for a moment complete silence followed. Then the audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in a standing ovation. Mike sat stunned, his hands still on the keys as Klein stood and pulled him to his feet. "Take a bow," Klein instructed quietly. "You've earned it." Mechanically, Mike bowed, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The applause continued, washing over him like a wave. In the audience, Lily was jumping up and down, clapping wildly, her face split by the biggest smile he'd seen since before Sophia died. As the applause finally began to fade, Klein turned to him. "Not bad for someone who hasn't performed in years," he said with a small smile. "Perhaps it's time to reconsider some choices, yes?" Before Mike could respond, Klein addressed the audience again. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mike Torres. Remember that name." As Mike made his way back to his seat on shaky legs, surrounded by continuing applause and curious glances, he felt as if he were walking between two worlds, the life he had and the life that might have been. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to wonder if those worlds might somehow be bridged. "Dad," Lily whispered as he sat down beside her, her eyes wide with wonder, "you were amazing." In that moment, with his daughter's hand in his and the echo of music still hanging in the air, Mike felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Possibility. The drive home from the concert hall was filled with Lily's excited chatter. She bounced in her seat, reliving every moment of the night, especially the part where her dad had played with Thomas Klein. "Did you see how everyone stood up at the end?" "That's called a standing ovation, Dad?" "My teacher told us about those. They only happen when something is really, really good." Mike nodded, still dazed from the experience. His fingers tingled as if they couldn't quite believe what they'd just done after so many years of cleaning floors instead of playing music. "And Mr. Klein said to remember your name," Lily continued. "Like you're famous now." "I'm definitely not famous, Lily Bear," Mike said with a small laugh. "Just a janitor who used to play piano." Lily frowned at him. "You're not just a janitor, Dad, you're a pianist too." "I saw it." Her simple faith in him brought a lump to his throat. "Thanks, kiddo." When they arrived home, Mike expected Lily to crash from the excitement, but she was still wired, asking if they could look up videos of other piano duets online. As he tucked her into bed nearly an hour past her bedtime, she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Dad, why did you stop playing piano? You're so good at it." Mike sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes life takes us in different directions than we planned. When your grandparents got sick, I needed to work to help them. Then I met your mom and we had you, and I needed to support our family." "But you love it," Lily said. "Mom always said we should do things we love." The mention of Sophia made Mike's heart twist. "She did say that, didn't she? She told me once that you used to play for her all the time when you were dating," Lily said, her eyes drooping despite her excitement. "She said it made her fall in love with you." Mike blinked back sudden tears. Sophia had indeed loved his playing. In the early days, he'd play for her in the music building after hours, and later in their tiny apartment on a keyboard with broken keys. After Lily was born, there'd been less time, and after Sophia died, playing had hurt too much. "Your mom was right about a lot of things," he said softly, kissing Lily's forehead. "Get some sleep now. We've got regular life again tomorrow." But as Mike sat in the quiet living room afterward, staring at the cheap keyboard in the corner that he sometimes played late at night, he wondered what regular life even meant anymore. Today had cracked open a door he'd thought permanently closed. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mike, this is Diane Chen. Hope you don't mind that I got your number from HR. Thomas Klein would like to meet with you tomorrow morning if possible. Can you come to the hall at 10 a.m.? It's important." Mike stared at the message, his pulse quickening. What could Thomas Klein possibly want with him? Today had been a nice moment, sure. But tomorrow Klein would be off to his next concert in some other city, and Mike would be back to stocking shelves and mopping floors. Still, he found himself texting back, "I'll be there." Sleep didn't come easily that night. Mike tossed and turned, his mind replaying the duet, hearing both the moments of brilliance and the small errors only he and Klein would have noticed. By morning, he'd convinced himself that Klein wanted to meet just to be polite, or maybe to offer some words of encouragement before moving on. After dropping Lily at school, telling her nothing about the meeting in case it turned out to be nothing, Mike drove to the concert hall. He parked in his usual spot in the back lot where the maintenance staff parked, rather than the guest spots out front. Force of habit. The hall was quiet at this hour, with just a few staff members preparing for the day. Mike made his way to the administrative offices, feeling out of place in his jeans and button-up shirt. He dressed slightly nicer than usual, but still nowhere near the level of the people who typically conducted business here. Diane met him in the lobby, her smile warm. "Mike, thank you for coming. Thomas is waiting in the green room." She led him backstage to the small but elegant room where performers waited before going on stage. Thomas Klein was seated at a small table, a cup of coffee in front of him, looking through some papers. He looked up when Mike entered and stood to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming, Mike," he said. "Please sit down." Mike sat across from him, hyper-aware of his calloused hands and the small tear in his shirt cuff that he'd noticed too late to change. "Ms. Chen said you wanted to see me." Klein nodded, studying him with intense eyes. "I've been thinking about your playing yesterday. It was remarkable, considering the circumstances." "Thank you," Mike said cautiously, waiting for the but that surely would follow. "Not perfect," Klein continued, confirming Mike's expectations. There were technical issues, memory slips in the development section, some uneven passages. Mike nodded, looking down at the table. "It's been a long time since I played seriously. And yet," Klein said, leaning forward, "there was something there that many technically perfect pianists lack. Something real, honest." He paused. "Something worth developing." Mike looked up, confused. "Developing?" Klein exchanged a glance with Diane, who had remained standing by the door. "I'd like to offer you an opportunity, Mike. I run a summer music program in Vermont for promising pianists. Most are young students, but occasionally we accept older musicians who show exceptional potential." Mike blinked, sure he had misheard. "You want me to apply to your program?" "No," Klein said simply. "I want you to attend. I'm offering you a full scholarship." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "That's very generous, but I can't possibly accept. I have responsibilities here. My daughter, my jobs." "The program is 6 weeks," Klein interrupted. "And we have accommodations for families. Your daughter could come with you." Mike shook his head, still unable to process what was happening. "I can't just leave my jobs for 6 weeks. I'd lose them, and then what? Come back and start over with nothing." Diane stepped forward. "Actually, Mike, that's where I come in." She sat beside Klein. "We've been discussing this since last night. The concert hall would hold your position. In fact, we'd like to offer you something more permanent afterward." "More permanent?" Mike repeated, feeling like he was in some strange dream. "We've been looking to expand our community outreach program," Diane explained. "Classes for underprivileged kids, recitals for seniors, that sort of thing. We need someone who understands music but also connects with people." She smiled. "Someone like you." Mike ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. "This is a lot to take in." "Of course it is," Klein agreed. "But sometimes life offers unexpected turns and we must decide whether to take them." He slid a folder across the table. "All the information is here. The program starts in June. You have time to consider." "Why me?" Mike asked finally. "There are hundreds of better pianists out there, thousands." Klein's expression grew thoughtful. "When I was 19, I was ready to quit music entirely. I had technical skill but nothing to say. Then I heard an old man playing in a small church in my village. His technique was flawed, but when he played..." Klein paused, searching for the right words. It was like he had lived every note. "That day changed my path." He looked directly at Mike. "Yesterday you reminded me of him." Mike didn't know how to respond to that. His throat felt tight. "Take some time," Diane suggested gently. "Talk to Lily. Think about what you want your life to look like." What he wanted his life to look like. It had been so long since Mike had allowed himself to think beyond the next bill, the next shift, the next day of just keeping things together for Lily's sake. "I'll think about it," he promised, taking the folder. As he left the concert hall, the morning sun warm on his face, Mike felt like he was walking in two worlds again. But this time the line between them seemed less clear, less fixed. He called in sick to the hardware store for the first time in 3 years and drove to the small park near Lily's school. Sitting on a bench, he opened the folder and read through the materials about Klein's summer program. It was prestigious. Pianists from around the world applied to study there, and Klein was offering him a spot just like that. The community outreach position at the concert hall was outlined too. A real job with benefits, doing something that mattered, something connected to music. The salary was modest, but more than he made from his 2 current jobs combined. It seemed impossible. People like him didn't get second chances like this. Life didn't work that way. And yet Mike pulled out his phone and found a text from Mrs. Patterson, who sometimes watched Lily after school. "Everyone's talking about your performance last night?" Someone posted a video online. "So proud of you, Mike, a video?" With shaking fingers, Mike searched his name in the concert hall. Sure enough, several clips appeared, filmed by audience members. He clicked on one. There he was, sitting beside Thomas Klein at the grand piano, playing as if the last 10 years hadn't happened. The camera panned to show the audience, and Mike caught a glimpse of Lily's face shining with pride. The comments below the video were filled with praise and questions. Who is this guy? Where did they find him? Incredible story. Does he have other performances scheduled? Mike closed the video, his mind racing. Was this real? Could he really step back into music after all this time? What would Sophia think? As if in answer, he remembered something she had said during those difficult days after they learned of her diagnosis, when he was frantic with worry about their future. "Life is going to change no matter what we do," she had told him, her face serene despite everything. "The only choice we get is how we dance with those changes." Mike looked up at the blue sky, feeling a strange sense of peace settling over him. Maybe this opportunity was how he learned to dance again. He glanced at his watch. Lily would be getting out of school soon. He'd pick her up early today and they'd talk about Vermont, about music, about taking chances, about how sometimes life surprises you when you're just cleaning the stage. For the first time in years, Mike found himself looking forward to tomorrow. 2 years later, Mike stood in the wings of the same concert hall, watching as Lily helped arrange chairs on stage. Now 12, she moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there, setting out sheet music and checking the piano bench height. She had grown taller in these 2 years, her face losing some of its childish roundness, but her smile was the same, bright and full of life. "Nervous?" Diane asked, appearing beside him with a clipboard. Mike nodded. "Always am before these community concerts, more than the regular ones somehow. Because these matter more to you," Diane said simply. She was right. In the 2 years since that night when Thomas Klein had invited him to play, Mike's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. The summer program in Vermont had been challenging, humbling, and exhilarating all at once. Lily had thrived there too, making friends with the children of other musicians and taking beginning piano lessons herself. When they returned to the city, Mike had started his new position at the concert hall, community music director. The title still felt strange sometimes, but the work never did. 3 days a week he taught piano to children who couldn't afford private lessons. 2 days a week he performed outreach concerts at schools, retirement homes, and community centers. And once a month he organized these concerts, showcasing his students on the same prestigious stage where world-famous musicians performed. "Dad, we're ready," Lily called from the stage, breaking his reverie. Mike checked his watch. "Still 20 minutes before people arrive." "Perfect," Diane said. "Just enough time for you to warm up." Mike nodded and walked out onto the stage. The hall looked different from this angle now, familiar rather than intimidating. He sat at the piano, running his fingers over the keys in quiet scales and arpeggios. This wasn't the same piano from that night. That one was reserved for the professional concerts. But it was still a beautiful instrument, far better than he'd had access to for most of his life. As he played, his mind drifted back over the past 2 years. They hadn't been easy. Returning to serious music study in his 40s, alongside talented young pianists in their teens and 20s, had been humbling. There were days at Klein's summer program when he'd questioned everything, when his fingers wouldn't cooperate, when he'd wondered if he was making a terrible mistake. But then there were the other moments. Lily sitting beside him on the bench as he taught her simple melodies. The look on a student's face when they mastered a piece they'd been struggling with. Standing ovations at community centers that meant more to him than any applause in fancy concert halls. And there had been professional successes too. A small recording contract for an album of piano works by overlooked composers. Invitations to play with regional orchestras. A growing reputation not as a virtuoso but as something perhaps more valuable. A pianist who connected with audiences, who told stories through music. Mr. Torres. A small voice broke through his thoughts. One of his students, a 9-year-old boy named Luis, stood nervously at the edge of the piano. I forgot how the middle part goes. Mike smiled, moving over on the bench to make room. Let's go through it together. As he guided Luis through the troublesome passage, Mike caught sight of Lily watching them from across the stage, her expression thoughtful. She had her mother's eyes, observant and kind. Sometimes it still hurt to see so much of Sophia in her, but mostly now it felt like a gift, a way of keeping part of her with them. Better? Mike asked Luis after they'd played the section several times. The boy nodded, some of his nervousness fading. I think I got it now. You'll be great, Mike assured him. And remember, it's okay to make mistakes. The audience is here to support you, not judge you. As Luis went back to his waiting family, Mike glanced around the hall. It was starting to fill with people. Parents, siblings, grandparents, friends, and community members who came regularly to these concerts. He recognized many faces now, people who'd been coming since he started this program. Backstage, his students were gathering, 20 children ranging from 7 to 17, all from neighborhoods and backgrounds where private music lessons would normally be out of reach. Some had discovered remarkable talent. Others struggled but kept showing up week after week. Mike was proud of all of them. 5 minutes, Diane called, giving him a thumbs up. Mike nodded and went to join his students. They formed a circle backstage, a pre-concert ritual they'd developed over time. Remember, he told them quietly, music is about connection, connecting with the composer's ideas, connecting with your own emotions and connecting with the audience. That's all that matters today. They nodded, some looking nervous, others excited. Mike remembered his own student recitals, the butterflies in his stomach, the fear of forgetting notes. But he also remembered the joy when it went well, when the music flowed through him to reach others. Mr. Torres, one of his older students, a teenager named Anna, spoke up. We have something for you. Mike looked at her surprised as she handed him a small wrapped package. What's this? Just open it, Lily said, grinning. She'd obviously been in on whatever this was. Mike unwrapped the package to find a framed photograph. It showed him at the piano, surrounded by his students, all of them laughing at something. He remembered the day, a rehearsal where everything had gone wrong, and they'd ended up laughing so hard they had to take a break. Turn it over, Anna urged. On the back, each student had signed their name, along with a brief message. In the center, someone had written, "Thank you for showing us that it's never too late for a second movement." Mike swallowed hard, touched beyond words. This is... Thank you. You're always telling us how music changed your life, Anna said. But you changed ours too. There was a murmur of agreement from the others. Mike looked at their faces, some shy, some bold, all sincere, and felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Places, everyone, Diane called, saving him from having to speak through the lump in his throat. The concert began with the youngest students performing simple pieces, their small fingers careful on the keys, faces intense with concentration. Mike watched from the side of the stage, offering encouraging nods when they looked his way. Parents beamed and took photos, applauding enthusiastically after each performance. As the program progressed to the older, more advanced students, Mike found himself thinking about how far they'd all come. Anna, who'd been so shy she could barely speak when she first arrived, now played with confident expression. Luis, who'd struggled with rhythm, now kept perfect time as he performed his Mozart piece. Halfway through the concert came the part Mike always found most moving, a group piece where all the students participated, regardless of level. The more advanced players took the difficult parts, while beginners played simple bass lines or repeated patterns. It was always a bit messy, never perfect, but somehow all the more beautiful for its imperfections. Today they were playing an arrangement Mike had written of a folk melody his mother used to sing to him. As they played, he watched the audience, the parents leaning forward in their seats, some with tears in their eyes. Community members nodding along to the familiar tune, Diane in the back smiling with satisfaction. This, he realized, was what Sophia had meant about dancing with life's changes. Not fighting against them, not merely accepting them, but finding a way to move with them gracefully, creating something beautiful from whatever comes. When it was time for the final piece, Mike took his place at the piano. This had become another tradition. He would close each concert with a solo performance. Today, he'd chosen a piece he'd been working on for months, one he'd composed himself. This piece is called Second Movement, he told the audience. It's dedicated to my late wife, Sophia, who taught me that endings can also be beginnings, and to my daughter, Lily, who never stopped believing in what I could be. Lily, sitting in the front row now, smiled up at him, her eyes shining. As Mike began to play, he thought about the path that had led him here. From his interrupted studies, to working 2 jobs to support his family, to cleaning this very stage late at night. He thought about that evening when Diane had discovered him playing in the empty hall, about performing with Thomas Klein, about the choices he'd made since. His fingers moved across the keys with certainty now, his technique stronger than it had been 2 years ago, but still uniquely his own. The piece told his story, grief and struggle giving way to unexpected joy, loss transformed into new possibility. In the middle section, where the music grew contemplative, Mike looked out at his students standing at the back of the hall, at Lily watching him with pride, at the community that had embraced them. He'd never be a world-famous concert pianist like Thomas Klein, and that was okay. He'd found something different, something that fit the life he'd lived and the person he'd become. As the piece built toward its conclusion, growing in power and hope, Mike felt tears on his face. He didn't try to hide them. This was part of the story, too. The emotion that had always been in his playing, even when his technique had faltered. The final chords resonated through the hall, and for a moment there was silence. Then the audience rose to their feet, applauding with genuine warmth. Mike stood and bowed, then gestured to his students to join him on stage for a final bow together. As they stood there side by side, Mike caught Lily's eye in the audience. She was crying too, but smiling through her tears, clapping until her hands must have hurt. Later, after the reception, after the students and their families had gone home, Mike found himself alone on the stage again. He ran his hand along the piano's polished surface, remembering how it had felt to clean this stage night after night, stealing moments to play when no one was listening. Life rarely follows a straight path. Sometimes it takes unexpected turns, leads us down difficult roads, or circles back to where we began, but with new eyes to see it differently. Mike had come to understand that the journey itself, with all its wrong notes and unresolved cadences, was its own kind of music. From the back of the hall, Lily called, "Dad, ready to go home?" Mike smiled. "Yes," he called back. "I'm ready," and he was, ready for whatever movement came next.